Welcome. It is Verdict with Senator Ted Cruz, Ben Ferguson with you, and it's nice to have you with us wherever you're listening around the country. We have got a lot of news that has been breaking this week, including a major victory as a New York appeals court has thrown out that $500 million penalty against Donald Trump, something that we predicted right here on this show.
Well, that's right. There's an enormous amount we're talking about today, but I want to say at the outset that this podcast is brought to you by Cracker Barrel. They don't have crackers. They don't have barrels. They hate you and your family. There's nothing that your values stand for that they stand for, but they are happy to be woke and erase their entire history, erase American exceptionalism. That, of course, is not true for those of you who are hiring lawyers right now. That is what's known as parody. So that is not accurate. But I will say what is accurate is what Ben just said, that President Trump won a massive victory today in the New York Court of Appeals. The New York Court of Appeals threw out the entirety, every penny of the $500 million judgment that the rabid partisan attorney general in New York, Letitia James, had gotten against President Trump. We're going to break that down, explain to you exactly what happened. We're also going to talk about an amazing story that the New York Times broke about how Democrat Party registration is plummeting. It is plummeting everywhere. In every single state in the union that measures party registration, Democrat Party registration is dropping through the floor. We're going to give you those facts as well. We've also got a special guest on today's podcast. We've got my friend and colleague, Eric Schmitt, senator from Missouri. He's got a brand new book about fighting the Biden administration, fighting the left in court. We have a discussion about the strategies that work to fight the left-wing woke lunatics. And finally, we're going to talk about a story that broke as well about how the Biden Department of Justice raised serious legal questions from the auto pen in chief, serious questions about the pardons that Joe Biden's auto pen signed at the end of his presidency. We're going to talk about how those serious questions draw into real doubt the legality of those auto pen pardons. All of that on today's Verdict.
I told you, it's a packed show. Let me tell you real quick about an awesome company that I really want you to know about that's making a difference every day, standing up for what we all believe in. It is a company called Patriot Mobile. For 13 years, this company has been taking about 5% of their customers' bill at no extra cost to them and giving it back to support conservative causes that fight for our First and our Second Amendment rights, the rights of unborn children, our veterans, our wounded warriors, our soldiers. And this is why I love them as a company. But they also do something else that's amazing. They give you an incredible coverage because they're on all three major networks without the woke agenda of Big Mobile. Big Mobile's been giving big donations for decades to hardcore liberal candidates, causes, and organizations. And that is why I made the switch. They give me amazing coverage. They save me money over what I was paying with Big Mobile. And switching now has never been easier. It literally takes minutes over the phone. Now, they've got a 100% U.S.-based customer service team. You're going to talk to somebody that loves what they do and loves America, and they're going to help you switch easily. You can keep your same number, keep the same phone you have, or treat yourself to an upgrade. Now, if you're in a contract, they've got a buyout program. Don't worry about it. If you need new phones, talk about that. Not a problem. And if you've got a business or a small business, they can help you migrate over all of those lines easily. So make a difference with every call you make. Go to patriotmobile.com/verdict. That's patriotmobile.com/verdict. Or you can call them and use the promo code verdict. I'm going to give you a free month of service. 972-PATRIOT. That's 972-PATRIOT. Or patriotmobile.com/verdict and make a difference with every call and text you make. All right, so Senator, we predicted this. It doesn't mean that this lawfare was easy. We did say that the appeals court you thought would throw out the egregious $500 million penalty against Donald Trump. The president saying in a post, it's now with interest would be over $550 million judgment against him. And the appellate court's thrown it out. Explain exactly what happened.
Well, this podcast has covered at length the egregious lawfare that was waged against President Trump. He was indicted 4 times by rabid Democrat prosecutors who wanted to stop the voters from doing what they in fact did in November of 2024, which is reelecting him as president. And then this case by Letitia James, another hard partisan who campaigned promising the Democrat primary voters, if you elected her, she would go after Donald Trump, which is, of course, an absolute abuse of the justice, the role of attorney general, fair and impartial administration of the law. It is a weaponization of justice. And she, in a mockery of justice, the New York trial court issued an order that, as President Trump rightly pointed out, with interest and penalties, would be worth over $550 million. This was all for loans that President Trump and the Trump organization took from very sophisticated global banks. And they claimed that he overstated the value of his real estate. Now, mind you, there were no victims. The supposed aggrieved parties were giant banks who were perfectly capable of valuing real estate on their own, and they did value real estate on their own. They lost no money, not a penny. They said they were thrilled to do the loans and they would be eager to do more loans going forward. And yet the New York Attorney General said, you got to pay $550 million. And the New York Appellate Division overturned it, and it reduced that penalty from $550 million to zero. $0.00. It concluded that the disgorgement was an excessive fine that violates the Eighth Amendment. This is exactly right. And this is what we predicted on this podcast. Look, one of the things about the Verdict podcast it is we make real predictions. We make predictions that are sometimes out there, that are sometimes very few people are making. Early on, more than a year before the election last year, I predicted Joe Biden will not be the nominee. At the time, this podcast was mocked. Ben and I were mocked for being crazy tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorists. That, of course, proved correct. I want you to listen to what we said a year ago, predicting the result that just happened this week. Give a listen to what we said 1 year ago.
Letitia James, who is a left-wing partisan Democrat, she ran for office promising to get Donald Trump. That was her campaign promise. You elect me, and I'm going after Donald Trump. I'm going to get him. So this was not a fair and objective application of the law. This was a political vendetta from day one.
Let me ask you this. How is that not against the law to run for office saying that when you become what is supposed to be a steward of law and order, that you're actually running to lock up someone you disagree with politically? How is that legal in America today?
Well, I think that's going to be a very serious claim on appeal. And I think there is a significant chance this gets overturned on appeal, but that's going to take a long time. The prosecutor on her face is not fair, is not impartial, but is engaged in a partisan political vendetta. She said that before she knew the facts of anything.
I mean, this was a while ago. This was February 19th of last year, like 2024. And when we said it, people were like, this is ridiculous.
Well, it is, and then we went back to it in March of 2024, and we talked about the specific legal claim that the New York Appellate Court just addressed, and that was the Eighth Amendment, that it was an excessive fine. And when we come back in just a minute, we're going to play what we said in March of 2024, laying out the legal ground that just has been put in place to set aside this absolute abuse of power. Now, to be clear, this claim will go up on appeal. There's one other level of appeals up to the New York Court of Appeals, the top appellate court in New York. And so it's possible the New York appellate courts reverse it yet again. I don't think they will. And I think if they did, it would go to the Supreme Court and be reversed once again. So one way or another, this order is not going to go into effect. Donald Trump is not going to have to pay $500 million. Today is a day for celebration because the New York courts actually did their job and they corrected a grotesque injustice from an abusive district judge in New York.
I want to take you back to March 23rd of 2024, and I want you to hear what we had to say about this case on this show.
The impact, if Trump is not able to post this bond, the effect would be to deny him the right to even appeal the absurd partisan decision from the district court. I got to say, this is such a profound abuse. Now, that doesn't mean Trump would be out of options, because if the New York courts insist you got to put up $500 million in order to appeal this decision, I am confident that Trump will appeal that and potentially appeal that all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court, he would have multiple arguments, constitutional arguments, including the Constitution prohibits depriving an individual of property without due process of law, and there would be an argument that this is such an excessive bond that it constitutes a violation of due process. He would also have an argument under the Eighth Amendment. The Eighth Amendment specifies excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Now, the Eighth Amendment typically applies in a criminal context, but given the magnitude here, I would expect him to make both an Eighth Amendment argument and a due process argument, and it is entirely possible that would prevail ultimately. But what New York is doing, what the New York Attorney General is doing, is the conduct of a banana republic.
Conduct of a banana republic. It doesn't sound crazy now at all, even though others said it was.
Yeah, look, and I want to say I'm glad that the New York appellate courts actually did their job. They followed the rule of law. The ground that I predicted in March of last year of excessive fines is exactly the ground on which they set it aside. And I got to say, Letitia James put out a statement today that I found side-splitting funny. She said, her statement today, she said, quote, the First Department today affirmed the well-supported finding of the trial court. Donald Trump, his company, and 2 of his children are liable for fraud. The court upheld the injunctive relief we won, limiting Donald Trump and the Trump Organization's officers' ability to do business in New York. It should not be lost to history. Yet another court has ruled that the president has violated the law and that our case has merit. We will seek appeal to the Court of Appeals and continue to protect the rights and interests of New Yorkers. So she's celebrating that they said our case has merit, other than the fact that they took the fine from $550 million to 0. That's an awfully weird decision to celebrate as a victory. This was a crushing loss for Letitia James. It was an enormous victory for President Trump, and it was an enormous victory for the rule of law. And by the way, ironically, it was an enormous victory for the state of New York, because I got to say, if this had been upheld, you would have seen a significant exodus of businesses being willing to do business in New York, because if the Attorney General could simply go after any business and shake them down for hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars, a whole lot of people would say, this is not a place I can do business. And so this week's decision is cause for celebration.
Yeah, it really is. And this brings us to another story that I think ties in perfectly. Democrats are losing support, and they're now facing a voter registration crisis. Democrats are facing a crisis as more than 2 million voters leave the party in just a 4-year, based on data and analysis coming from the New York Post, also the New York Times reporting on this, several others. I go back to Letitia James, a great example of this. When you go rogue and you try to destroy people's lives and you go after Donald Trump the way you did and you use lawfare and all that we now know about, the deep state and the corruption, it's a great way to make people say, maybe I don't want to be involved in this party.
Well, Ben, look, you're just a right-wing partisan. Obviously, you're saying things that favor one side of the political aisle, but why should anyone trust you? It's not like anyone else is saying this. Oh, wait, here is the New York Times, not exactly a right-wing partisan outlet. Let me just read from the New York Times this week. Here's the headline. The Democratic Party faces a voter registration crisis. The party is bleeding support beyond the ballot box, a new analysis shows. And here's what the New York Times writes in the body of the article. The Democratic Party is hemorrhaging voters long before they even go to the polls. Of the 30 states that track voter registration by political party, Democrats lost ground to Republicans in every single one between the 2020 and 2024 elections, and often by a lot. That 4-year swing towards the Republicans adds up to 4.5 million voters, a deep political hole that could take years for the Democrats to climb out from. The stampede, that's the word that the New York Times is using, the stampede away from the Democratic Party is occurring in battleground states, the bluest states, and the reddest states too, according to a new analysis of voter registration data by the New York Times. The analysis used voter registration data compiled by L2, a nonpartisan data firm. This is stunning. All told, this is again reading from the New York Times, Democrats lost about 2.1 million registered voters between 2020 and the 2024 elections, in the 30 states, along with Washington, D.C., that allow people to register with the political party. Republicans gained 2.4 million. That says an enormous amount that the Democrats are in crisis, that even the New York Times is saying so. And I got to say, I don't know a single one of my colleagues in the Senate, the Democrat colleagues, who is asking why. Why is it that so many people are running away from our disastrous policies? The Democrats continue to embrace those policies, and I think as long as they do, you're going to continue to see this, and you're going to see it even accelerate.
Yeah, it's going to accelerate. And I also think part of this is the Democratic Party has let the extremists really come in and take over. And now there's an identity crisis. Are we Marxists? Are we socialists? Are we communists? The old Democratic Party is dead. Is that the feeling in Washington, D.C. around your colleagues as well? Are they concerned?
Well, no, not among the Democrats. Look, the
Really?
Democrats seemed oblivious. Here's a quote from the New York Times. Quote, "I don't want to say the death cycle of the Democratic Party, but there seems to be no end to this," said Michael Pruser, who tracks voter registration closely as the director of data science for Decision Desk HQ. And it points out that the party saw some of its steepest declines in registration among men and younger voters, two constituencies that sharply swung towards Mr. Trump. At the end of the day, this is not complicated. When you embrace policies that are a failure, that cause inflation, that open borders, that threaten your families, when you take every 80-20 issue in America and the Democrat Party says, we'll take the 20, people run away from your party as extreme and out of touch.
One of the fun things about what you do is you've got colleagues that you know well, and from time to time, great books are written, and one of your colleagues, Senator Eric Schmitt from Missouri, is with us right now, and he's got a new book out.
Well, we're glad to welcome Eric Schmitt to the podcast. He has a brand new book. It is entitled The Last Line of Defense, How to Beat the Left in Court. And Eric is a good friend. Before he was in the Senate, he was the Attorney General of Missouri. And he was a warrior. He was a warrior taking on the Biden administration, taking on big tech, taking on the radical left. And he built a very strong record as Attorney General. And that's the record he campaigned for Senate on. And when Eric launched his campaign for Senate, I endorsed him early on and came to Missouri, campaigned alongside him. He ran a fantastic campaign. He won decisively. And now he's a colleague of mine on the Commerce Committee and on the Judiciary Committee. So we spend a lot of time together. We have similar passions. Eric, welcome to Verdict.
It's great to be with you guys. Thanks for having me on.
All right, so tell us about the book. You have a brand new book, The Last Line of Defense, How to Beat the Left in Court. Tell us why you wrote it and why folks want to go out and buy it.
Well, yeah, it's really a kind of a field manual from the front lines of this battle against the left-wing lawfare machine that I saw front and center in my time as Missouri Attorney General. And I know that we're kind of on the other side of the fever dream, guys, after President Trump delivered this historic victory. We've got all these wins we're celebrating. But if you go back, if you take that DeLorean back in time just a few years, it was a time of lockdowns and compulsory COVID shots and open borders and DEI struggle sessions and ESG requirements and a censorship enterprise that was so vast, I think it was the biggest affront to the First Amendment we've seen in our nation's history. So when I was AG, we stood up and we fought back. We took the COVID vaccine mandate all the way to the Supreme Court, and we won. We took the student loan debt forgiveness case all the way to the Supreme Court, and we won. We filed Missouri versus Biden, and we uncovered this vast censorship enterprise. We took the deposition of Fauci. We took the deposition of Elvis Chan, who was pre-bunking the Hunter Biden laptop story for the FBI. We took on mask mandates at local schools. We pushed back against ESG requirements. We went after local school districts for their CRT. So we were in the middle of the arena. And I wanted to write the book because there's a lot of lessons learned here. We stood up, we fought back, and we won. And it's a playbook. It's a playbook moving forward. This isn't the last time we're going to see that from the left. In fact, they're kind of engaged in lawfare right now. So anyway, there's a lot to learn here, and I think the readers or your listeners will get a lot from it, from these sort of behind-the-scenes stories of how it took place.
Good. Let's talk about several of the topics that you dove into. Let's talk about Anthony Fauci, and you talked about taking his deposition. To tell us what you learned, and I have said many times Anthony Fauci is the most damaging bureaucrat to have ever lived. I think you've said very much the same thing, but tell us about that deposition and what you learned.
Yeah, so this took place in November of 2022, just after I was elected to the U.S. Senate. And one of the key things, Ted, you'll appreciate this, one of the things that we talked about in The Last Line of Defense you can order on Amazon right now is that we sought discovery before the injunction. Typically with these cases, you seek an injunction to get the government to stop doing what they're doing. We sought discovery first. We knew it would get a lot of attention as far as the case. Everybody labeled it a conspiracy theory that conservatives were actually being throttled and deplatformed. We knew it was true. So we got to take the deposition of Fauci. He comes in the room. A fun little story. Jeff Landry, who's my colleague from Louisiana, had the RFK Jr.'s The Real Anthony Fauci book on the middle of the table as he walked in. I'm sure Fauci did not find that very humorous, but it kind of set the stage for the day. And we went through. And what was really interesting about it was he said, I can't recall 174 times, sort of simultaneously as declaring he was the science. He didn't like to be challenged. And those depositions,
like what kind of things
hours,
could he not recall? What was he? What kind of questions was he dodging?
So we initially started with, where did this virus come from? And, he was very adamant that it couldn't have come from the Wuhan lab, right? Because he kind of funded the EcoHealth Alliance to fund the Wuhan lab. He knew it would come back to him. So he was very interested in making sure people didn't think that. And then when he was confronted with statements about, he's like, well, no, it's a plausible theory, I suppose. He was kind of vacillating. I don't remember saying that. He discredited, Ted, anybody that challenged him on whether it was the lab leak theory or masks. We presented him with an email when we asked him if masks were effective, and of course he said, yes, of course they're effective, and we presented him with an email early in 2020 where a friend asked him, hey, I'm getting on this flight, do you think I should wear a mask? He said, no, masks aren't effective for this. So he was just caught in inconsistency after inconsistency. I think probably the most telling thing, honestly, we came back from a lunch break, and the court reporter sneezed. And he turned to the court reporter, this is in November of 2022, not April of 2020, and demanded that she put a mask on. This was the guy in charge of our public health.
Are you kidding me?
It's totally insane. And
That's
so
nuts.
I think that those are the kind of insights that I think people will get from the last line of defense. It's just fascinating, but terrifying at the same time. So.
Well, and I will say this podcast, when the pandemic began in 2020, this podcast in March and April of 2020 was laying out chapter and verse the evidence that was clear even then that the COVID virus originated in a Chinese government lab, I think likely the Wuhan Institute for Virology. We laid out the facts, and while it was being censored virtually everywhere else, Verdict listeners had those facts right at the beginning. Now, your most significant case was challenging internet censorship and big tech censorship. Tell us about that case. Tell us the facts you found, and tell us what happened.
Yeah, and I actually say, too, Ted, one of the things that we note in the book, we sued the communist China for unleashing the COVID pandemic on the world through that Wuhan lab, and Missouri has a $24 billion judgment now. So that's just sort of as an aside. That's also in the book.
Wow.
Yes, the Missouri versus Biden lawsuit. We saw
Eric, I for one am looking forward to when you own the Great Wall of China. I think it's going to be a nice wall, and folks from Missouri are a little redneck, so I'm not sure what you're going to paint on the Great Wall of China.
They always
but
pay over there, no problem, right?
Well, we'll have to move that over to separate Missouri from Kansas. Roger Marshall will be very disappointed, I'm sure, when we move that Great Wall. We seize it.
But by the way, Ben is from Memphis, so it's not hard for a Memphis guy to talk crap about Missouri. But feel free to pop back hard at him.
But yeah, listen, Jen Psaki's saying we're flagging stuff for Facebook. They started this disinformation governance board. We had a hunch. We filed the lawsuit. We got discovery first in that lawsuit. And again, what we found was just shocking. These secret portals between high-ranking government officials and big tech giants. Take this down. The CDC was telling them words and phrases specifically. We took the depo of Elvis Chan, the FBI guy, who, again, was pre-bunking the Hunter Biden laptop story. They knew it was real in 2019, and in 2020, they're telling them, hey, censor this because it's not real, and that was verified by Yoel Roth, who worked at Twitter. There's just reams and reams of documents.
So the FBI was lying, and they knew they were lying.
They absolutely knew they were lying, and it was the first time anybody had them under oath to prove it. And so this was a leviathan of government agencies aimed at the American people, meant to censor conservatives who question masks or efficacy of vaccines or the 2020 election or the Hunter Biden laptop. We got to make sure that never happens again. So this book, a lion's share, honestly, the middle chapters are really dedicated to protecting free speech, exposing the censorship regime that existed. And I'm proud to have stood up for that. And we had some big wins along the way. But this is the last line of defense, How to Beat the Left in Court. You can order it now. Is really a playbook. And it's war stories, yes, but it's a playbook for the future, too.
All right, talk to us about DEI and ESG, because you also, as AG in Missouri, we're fighting against both of those and making a real difference.
Yeah, as Attorney General, you have subpoena power, and when we saw what was happening with ESG and this net zero banking alliance, which was really go after credit-worthy applicants because they, had a portfolio of fossil fuels or whatever, these banks they decided that by 2050 they were going to have a portfolio that was carbon neutral. Well, the only way you do that, Ted, is that you basically start denying credit-worthy applicants loans, including the family farmer, because they have diesel trucks. So we opened this up. We had a suspicion this was violated antitrust. We opened up this investigation. Ultimately, they backed away. And again, it takes courage to go do that. These are some powerful interests. But what you find out when you do it, you can be really proud of it, and you can win. Same with DEI, not only in corporate America, but what we found in school districts. So we were taking on, obviously, the Biden administration, the censorship regime at the highest levels of government, but also the local school superintendent in Springfield, Missouri. We uncovered documents. We had a hunch. We got a tip from a whistleblower that they were, spewing this poison to our kids, teachers, and staff. Turns out they were, engaged in things like the gender unicorn and the pyramid of oppression and all this nonsense to divide the classroom by race. Other school districts then chimed in once we started finding out across Missouri. This is in Missouri now, that kids were being forced to do the privilege walk. I mean, this is nuts. So, but again, what we have to do, Ted, you've done this your whole career. We have to have the courage to stand up and fight, and we can't cede the courtroom to that. So this book isn't written for lawyers. It's written for people who are seeing this, and how does this all kind of come together, and what can we do to push back?
The court is a major battleground, and I will say there are lessons in this book that I think are really useful for the Trump DOJ, including at using discovery, make the facts public, shine a light, get them under oath, hold them accountable, be aggressive, speak the truth, don't be afraid. The book is called The Last Line of Defense, How to Beat the Left in Court. It's by my friend Eric Schmitt, senator from the great state of Missouri. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it anywhere books are sold. So go buy The Last Line of Defense. And Eric, thanks for joining us here on Verdict.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
One other big story we got to get in here, Senator, is Biden's auto pen. We've got a new big update on this story. And apparently Joe Biden deliberately ignored his own Department of Justice's warnings over legally flawed auto pen pardons. And we also found out about how many pardons they were giving out. And they claimed from the White House podium that these are all nonviolent offenders. That was also a huge lie.
Well, that's right. And I will say this is the sort of story why we do Verdict as a podcast, why we do it as a radio show. Because this is the kind of story you will never see on CNN. You won't see it on MSNBC or ABC, NBC, CBS. It will not be covered by the corporate media because it is inconvenient. We have talked about at length the problems with Joe Biden's auto pen, that the president does not have the authority to delegate presidential power to another staff member. And when it comes to an auto pen, the critical question, whether a statute signed into law by an auto pen, an executive order signed by an auto pen, or a pardon or commutation signed by an auto pen, the critical question for whether it is legally valid is whether the president personally and directly authorized it, whether the president made the decision. If it's a staffer who made the decision, it is not valid and is legally void. Well, what broke is this week, is that at the time that Joe Biden was using the auto pen, or rather the White House staffers were using the auto pen, a senior career staffer in the Biden Department of Justice was raising real legal questions about it. Here's the story on Fox News. Headline: Biden's auto pen pardons disturb DOJ brass, docs show, raising questions whether they are legally binding. New documents and communications between Biden White House staff and career officials at the Justice Department prompted scrutiny of the legality of former President Joe Biden's thousands of last-minute pardons. The Oversight Project shared documents obtained from the Trump DOJ with Fox News Digital, showing that a career prosecutor warned Biden's inner circle that the administration's pardon process was unorthodox and legally troubling. In the most scrutinized email, then Assistant Deputy Attorney General Bradley Weinsheimer wrote a group email to several executive office staff members on January 18th, asking questions about the more than 2,500 pardons. Quote, "The White House has described those who received commutations as people convicted of nonviolent drug offenses. I think you should stop saying that because it is untrue or at least misleading. That's what DOJ said to the Biden White House. Mind you, they didn't stop it. They continued to be untrue and misleading. He continued, quote, as you know, even with the exceedingly limited review we were permitted to do of the individuals we believed you might be considering for commutation action, we initially identified 19 that were highly problematic, he continued. He cited convicts Terrence Richardson and Ferone Claiborne, who were included in the clemency grants, and noted that the DOJ received voluminous objections from the victims' families and law enforcement as the men had been sentenced to life imprisonment for drug trafficking offenses during which a police officer was killed. Mind you, this is what the Biden White House said was a nonviolent offense, drug trafficking where a police officer was killed. And beyond that, according to Oversight Project Vice President Kyle Brosnan, shows that DOJ was concerned about the, quote, vague construct of Biden's pardons and how they appeared to be, quote, illegally delegated to staff. That left the DOJ wondering at times which offenses for people with multiple convictions were specifically being expunged. Later in the email, he was like, quote, look, I read the statement you put out in the president's name saying you've released a bunch of nonviolent drug offenders. You've got murderers on your list today. So I'm trying to figure out what the president wants here for this funky warrant.
That is incredible, isn't it? I mean, funky warrant, and that's coming again from his own DOJ, saying we don't know what he wants, we don't know what he's doing, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, this is the Biden DOJ. Weinsheimer continued, quote, I think it is best that we receive a statement or direction from the president as to the meaning of the warrant language. That will allow us to give full effect to the commutation warrant in the manner intended by the president. And there was ultimately no explanation for what the offenses or the proverbial descriptions were, according to the document tranche. And instead, there was simply a spreadsheet of convicts attached to one of the emails that came from the U.S. Sentencing Commission. But only the president has the power to grant pardons, not the Sentencing Commission. Treating it otherwise would be an illegal delegation of presidential authority.
When you look at this, what does this mean moving forward for the investigation into the president's use of the auto pen and many things he may have signed that he didn't know about, right? This was just anybody at the White House pretty much that had any type of power could just walk in there and get things done. And what does this mean for all of they claimed non-violent offenders that they were pardoning? We've also found out a bunch of them were very violent. It was a lie.
Yeah, it was a lie. They knew it was a lie. Their own Department of Justice told them it was a lie. They didn't care it was a lie. They continued lying to the American people. They knew that the New York Times would never call them out. They knew that the corrupt media would never call them out. So they could lie and lie and lie and know that nobody would know about it. And as a legal matter, the Brosnan from the Oversight Project said, quote, Biden did not pardon individual people, but laid out categories of types of people to release and left it to staff to figure out who meets that criteria. Attorney Sam Dewey told Fox News Digital that, quote, literally no one, including DOJ officials, understands what the aforementioned pardon criteria are. And he continued, quote, you generally don't see people write emails like this. This isn't a CYA. This is, I'm going to do a Pontius Pilate routine because this is a drug deal, and I want to make sure it doesn't come back on me. And the consequence of that is that the pardons, if they were not authorized by the President of the United States, they are invalid. And so what I have urged the White House to do, what I've urged the Department of Justice to do, is to go through the records of everything that was auto-penned and determine there may be some. The president does have the authority to direct someone to auto-pen something that he's signing, whether a law or an executive order or pardon. And if it's the president who's making the decision, the prevailing Department of Justice interpretation is that is legal and binding. But if the president didn't make the decision, if it's a staffer who's making the decision, then it has no binding force. And so what I've encouraged both the White House and the Department of Justice is to find those pardons, those executive orders, those statutes that were auto-penned for which there is a clear lack of evidence that Joe Biden had awareness of it, made a decision about it, and then formulate and carry out a legal strategy to challenge and end up concluding that those statutes, executive orders, pardons, and commutations are invalid. I think the possibility of a legal determination of that is rising significantly. And the fact that you had senior career DOJ officials in the Biden administration ringing the alarm bells and saying you're lying to the American people and what you're doing is lawless, that is yet another stunning revelation that has come out this week.
Yeah, and it's going to be a story that's going to keep unfolding, and I can promise you we're going to cover it for you. Don't forget, we do the show as a podcast Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so make sure you hit that subscribe or auto-download button wherever you get your podcasts. Also, you can say, hey, Siri, hey, Alexa, play Verdict with Ted Cruz, and it will do it for you. And the Senator and I will see you back here on this station next week.